Now, 2020 was a crazy year. The big bad Rona had us all locked inside, probably spending most of our time watching TV. And if I could guess, you probably were watching Netflix. Now, Netflix had a lot of great shows. Some people watched Tiger King or Love is Blind or some movies from the 80s. Whatever it was, you probably spent time on this. But let's go back 20 years prior, around the same time period when Netflix was in its infancy. Now, the owner and CEO, Reed Hastings, would walk in the offices of Blockbuster. Now, if you're not familiar with Blockbuster, that's probably my people under 21. It was a place where you go to rent movies, whether DVD or VHS. That's some ancient software that your parents know about. Now, you would rent it for a few days and bring it back. Now, the thing was, if you took too long, you would get late fees. And that's where Netflix came in. They offered a service online where you can get these movies for a subscription service, and you can keep them as long as you want it without the fees. Blockbuster saw the value in that. They had a meeting with Reed, and he would go into the CEO's office and possibly get acquired. But their offer was a little too sweet. They wanted $50 million, and at the time, Blockbuster did not see the value. Now, what would happen is Blockbuster would go on its own and try to make Blockbuster.com to compete with Netflix. And sad to say, within 10 years, 5,600 stores got shut down, all but one that's just there for historical value. And Netflix would go on to be worth over $20 billion. It would have over 200 million subscribers and over 9,000 employees. Now, it's crazy, right? How the CEO of Blockbuster slept on something would become so huge and change the whole game of streaming and how we watch TV and movies. Now, the crazier thing about all this is there was someone else. No, not another tech company. We could say he's a technician. There's a young kid from Northern California that would be slept on by another billion-dollar industry, the NFL. And his name was Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr. Now, the question I pose is, how do people sleep on greatness when it's right in front of their face? Find out today on the Mental Breakdown.
What you doing live? What you doing live? What you doing live? What you doing live? Y'all can do it like me. What you doing live? Y'all can do it like me. What you doing live?
Now, everyone seems to love an underdog story. They like to see the little guy triumph over all of the obstacles and make it to greatness. But for some strange reason, while it's happening, people seem to miss it. Now, with Tom, that'd be no different. He wasn't even a starter on his high school team. He actually was behind someone, and he only got the starting spot because that guy quit. He actually said it himself, he was a better baseball player. But he would go on to become a better quarterback and put some numbers up in his high school career, respectable. But no one still cared. He was just this lanky kid, okay arm, and colleges were not knocking on his door. But then Michigan took a chance, and they recruited him. He would go on to play for the Wolverines, but he would have some talented quarterbacks that go ahead of him, such as Brian Griese, who's son of Hall of Famer Bob Griese, and who also go play in the NFL. But the thing was, he had to work his way to get to his position. Now, he eventually would start for the Wolverines, showing why he was there, and show they could take him to a bowl game and win. But unfortunately, someone would come under him, a freshman, Drew Henson, who would later also go to the NFL with a lackluster career, and take his spot. Because he was the future in their eyes. The coach didn't see Tom being that guy because he was about to be out. Drew was the future, so Tom had to split time, and for NFL scouts, they see this, they're gonna think, he must not be all that, why waste time on it? But Tom would prove them wrong once again and lead his team to wins after Drew didn't live up to the hype. Now, the funny thing is, when the draft came, everyone was looking at him as, who is this guy? He did his thing at Michigan, but he's slow, he's lanky, his arm's not the best. We got other guys we can pick up. So the funny thing is, 6 guys will go ahead of Tom Brady. Giovanni Carmazzi, Chad Pennington, Mark Bolger, Spurgeon Wynn, T. Martin, and Chris Redmond. Some of these names might sound familiar and some probably don't. And the crazy thing about it is, he played more games than all these quarterbacks combined. He scored more touchdowns, about 3 times as much than all quarterbacks combined out of the 6 that went ahead of him. So talk about picking the wrong horse. And you look at the parallels with Netflix, how they got slept on by Blockbuster, you can see the mistakes. But there's some more crazy correlations that we can see here. Netflix was founded in 1997, about an hour south of where Tom played. Now, while Tom was leaving to go to Michigan, Netflix was starting up, so they just crossed each other's paths. Netflix was turned down for being offered $50 million to Blockbuster to acquire them. Tom would go on to save over $60 million to the Patriots by taking cuts so he can build a team around him. Now we see the correlations, we see people get slept on, but why does this happen? Because you're human, and humans make mistakes. I know, nobody's perfect, but you're surprised how imperfect we really are. And when it comes to judgment, we're by far not as good as most people think they are. Now, why is this? Blame evolution. No, not that kind of evolution. No, not that kind either. Anyway, just listen to me. So when we say evolution, it means how do we adapt? Over hundreds of thousands of years, our species had to accommodate itself for survival. Now, a long time ago, before pumpkin spice, Netflix, and everything being delivered to you instantly to your door, we had to do something very interesting every single day. Survive. Yes, I'm not talking about making your next paycheck. I meant staying alive. Shouts to the Bee Gees. Now, the thing was, in order to do this, we had a lot of defense mechanisms to keep us going. One of them was called fight or flight, the stress response. So what happens is when you're in a stress response, your brain, which runs the show, about 20% of all energy, which is more than any other organ, it has to make decisions. Now, if you think about it, if you're in a life or death situation trying to get away from a predator, does it make sense to have to rationalize every single aspect of that, or just quickly fill in the blanks and do what needs to be done so you can survive? For example, if I put on the screen SP, probably thinking, what does that mean? Now, if I put periods in between, now you think, that must be initials. Scottie Pippen? Now, if I take the S and P and put it on the screen with 2 spaces in between, you're probably gonna say there must be a word. So if I said, if we're at a restaurant, that could become soup. Now, if I said you need to get clean, it now becomes soap. Now, you see how the context changes what the blanks are. And that's just how it works. We always gotta find that judgment, and it's not always right, or it's sometimes shifted. So we often get told these things and we go with the flow and just find our meaning. And sometimes the meaning's not even really there. But basically, you're trying to fill in the gaps. Your brain's trying to shorten the time it takes to figure that out. Now, imagine that in everyday life when you're making decisions. This same things that happen. So we shortcut these things. They're called schemas. Schema is basically an overview or a plan of how we attribute mental things to objects, places, situations. Like if I was to show you a car, you know a car is something you drive. It takes you place to place. If I show you a pencil, you know you write with that. Your brain doesn't have to fill in all the blanks with that. It just skips to what it is. And these structures help you formulate the world around you and your environment so you can just do everyday life. You don't have to think too much about it. But what happens is we get so much information, so much, over 30 gigs a day. So that means we're taking a lot. So if we have to take in all this information, we can't do it all at once. So these shortcuts help us, but sometimes they can backfire. Now, this is what we call cognitive biases. Cognitive bias are things that rationalize things in a shorter way, but like I said, sometimes it's misleading. And we'll talk about a few. The first one to talk about is availability heuristic. Now, this one is when we attribute the immediate information in our head to the topic at hand. For example, if I told you right now, I'm gonna put 4 different jobs on the screen. If I said which one is the most dangerous job rated by likeliness of death while on the job, which one would you choose? Give me a few seconds. Nope, not that one. Not that one. Okay, you're getting closer. On 2 options. Yes. You probably didn't think it was gonna be fisherman. Now, your brain usually sees the other options such as firemen or police as more dangerous because you think fire, get burned or run out of oxygen, or police, they have guns, you get shot. But in actuality, it doesn't happen that frequently. But since your brain needs to figure it out real quick, it has to fill in what makes the most sense. And when you think fishermen, you think boat, fish. Not too dangerous, right? But do you think about, fall overboard in the rough seas, way out catching the fish? You might drown, and that's how it happens. So the thing is, our brains is doing us a service by lessening the time, lessening the energy, but then we make mistakes. Also, outcome bias. This bias is basically when you attribute the outcome based off what you see. Now let's use Tom Brady once again. If you see his senior year at Michigan, you see that he had to start behind a freshman, that outcome is he must not be that good. But they didn't see the fact that, the coach is trying to build around the freshman player because his job is to win games. And even though Tom was great, he's going to be gone soon. So if you just look at what was happening in the outcome of things, you wouldn't see the real story. And when they made their judgment, picking him 199th overall and have 6 quarterbacks who no longer play, he's still going at it, a big mistake. So these judgments are things that, like I say, they help us, but they can lead us astray. And you wonder why people can get slept on. So as you can see, there's so many ways that your brain can mislead you. Now the thing is, how can we override these biases? You have to really look at the whole situation. For example, imagine if there was someone driving on the road and you're going, say, 80 miles per hour, just cruising, and this person cuts you off from the lane aside from you. You're probably gonna say they're a horrible driver, they're an a-hole, something's wrong with them. But you attribute that to that moment in time where they're driving. You don't know if they had a bad day, if they're rushing to the hospital to see a loved one who's sick, or a pregnancy, maybe their wife just went into labor. We don't know, so you attribute what you see to that very moment. And we make these judgments, it's easy for us to sleep on the little guy, the underdog, if you will. Now, the thing is, we can override these by slowing things down. Taking back to Tom Brady, taking back to Netflix. Maybe Blockbuster could saw that Netflix may have wanted 50 million, but they could have took them much higher and made more money because they would have grown the revenue stream. Blockbuster.com did not work. Or maybe the teams that didn't pick Brady would have saw that he may have not looked good on paper by their standards, but the other guys didn't have what he had. Didn't have the drive, the work ethic, the mindset. Other than Chad Pennington and Mark Bolger, none of those other guys lasted more than 2 years in the NFL consistently. So it's safe to say that overall, the choice of picking Tom Brady was right by the Patriots, and all those other coaches can look back and say, wow, we should kick ourselves in the butt. Now, both Netflix and Tom have come a long way since early 2000 when they both would be rejected respectively by the NFL and the other by Blockbuster. They've made many strides in their industries, one being considered the greatest of all time, the other changing the way we look at movies and TV. Now, whatever you may think, they definitely impacted their fields despite being slept on and being the underdog. Now, think next time what we've gone over, how are you making your decisions? Are you overlooking someone, something, or are you being the one overlooked? This is Netflix Brady effect. Don't let it happen to you. This Sunday is Mahomes versus Brady, the Bucks versus the Chiefs. Who you got? Make sure you make the right choice and get your mind right.